played. One evening, he walked right up to it and pressed his hand gently against the glass. He began murmuring in a rhythm, in a language Elena had never heard before. A security guard approached, telling them to step back. But Mateo suddenly turned to his mother and said, in perfect Spanish, "Mom, can I read this? Is it about Yeshua when he was a child?" The museum's chief papyrologist, Dr. Rashid Al-Masri, overheard the boy and froze. 30 years of studying ancient manuscripts had never prepared him for this moment. The idea that a 4-year-old could interpret what world-class experts couldn't was unthinkable. Yet when Dr. Al-Masri knelt down and gently asked, "What do you see here, little one?" Mateo pointed to a section of the papyrus, without hesitation, and began describing a story. Yeshua, at 6 years old, befriending a sick boy named Eliezer. Other children teasing him because he couldn't walk well, and Yeshua shaping small clay birds and making them fly, just to bring Eliezer joy. Mateo's voice flowed like he was reading a bedtime tale he already knew by heart. But the details he described, they were far too specific to be a child's imagination. Elena realized her son wasn't repeating random symbols. He was seeing scenes, events, as if the papyrus itself were telling him the story. The museum staff stood in stunned silence. No one could breathe, and everyone shared the same electrifying question. How could this child possibly know any of this? And what exactly was hidden inside this ancient? As Mateo continued speaking, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. No one thought this was a child's fantasy anymore. Everyone felt it. They were standing at the threshold of a discovery that could rewrite human history. Mateo moved his finger along the symbols on the glass, tracing them as though following a hidden path. He described how Yeshua crafted tiny clay birds so Eliezer wouldn't feel alone, how the boy laughed for the first time in ages when the birds took flight in Yeshua's hands. These weren't vague interpretations. They were precise, emotionally charged scenes. Eliezer's illness, the teasing, Yeshua's compassion. The kind of details only a true ancient account could contain. Dr. Al-Masri exchanged tense glances with the other experts. It was clear, something extraordinary was happening. Oxford specialist in ancient Coptic, Dr. Samira Naguib, was contacted immediately. When the situation was explained over the phone, her first reaction was a stunned whisper, "That's impossible." Yet once she arrived, she couldn't take her eyes off Mateo. The boy continued tracing the symbols with surprising confidence, almost like he was reading from an invisible script. He paused at one cluster of characters. "Here," he said softly. "It says Yeshua didn't want Eliezer to feel sad anymore. This symbol means birds. The one next to it means water. And this one here means to fly." When the clay birds rose, Eliezer felt free, like the sadness left him. The entire room fell into a silence thick enough to touch. Mateo wasn't just describing symbols. He was unlocking meaning from a language no living scholar understood. Then came the moment that left even the experts breathless. Dr. Naguib zoomed in on a symbol in the top corner of the papyrus, a mark that had puzzled linguists for months. "Mateo," she asked gently, "what do you think this means?" The boy didn't even blink. "That's the sign for witness. Someone uses it when they saw something important, something they promised never to forget. It means what's written here is someone's testimony." A chill rushed through the room. This was no ordinary document, and Mateo was no ordinary child. But the real shock was still ahead, when Mateo began reading the rest of the papyrus. Dr. Al-Masri quickly realized that ordinary museum protocols were no longer enough. This boy wasn't guessing, he was genuinely reading the papyrus. So, officially and at great risk, he ordered the document to be moved into a controlled research room where Mateo could examine it without the glass barrier. Elena signed the authorization forms with trembling hands. She was torn between pride and fear. Her son was doing something no one on earth could. Yet the meaning of all this was far bigger than any of them could grasp. Soon after, Mateo was seated in a quiet room lit by soft, angled lights. At the center of the table lay the ancient papyrus, suspended in a protective frame. It measured 42 by 89 centimeters and its jagged edges told the story of a long, perilous journey through time. Dr. Naguib knelt beside Matteo and whispered, "Sweetheart, you can't touch the papyrus. Just look, and tell us what you see." Matteo nodded with a seriousness far beyond his age. He leaned forward, eyes moving slowly, deeply, as if he were connecting with something beneath the ink itself. A minute passed. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the cameras recording every moment. And then Matteo spoke. "This was written by Tobias." The experts froze. "Tobias?" Dr. Al-Masri repeated cautiously. "Yes," Matteo said. "Eliezer's older brother. He wrote everything down, how Yeshua helped them, what he said, what he did. He wanted nothing to be lost." Matteo pointed to the lower corner of the papyrus. "His name is here. He wrote this 53 years after Yeshua died." Several researchers covered their mouths in shock. A precise year count? A scribe's identity? From a 4-year-old? But Matteo wasn't done. "There's a warning too." Dr. Al-Masri leaned over. "What kind of warning, Matteo?" Matteo's voice lowered, almost reverent. "It says, only the one who can read these words without having learned them is worthy to find what Yeshua hid." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. A prophecy. A test. And Matteo, this quiet, gentle child, felt certain it was talking about him. He lifted his gaze and looked straight at Dr. Al-Masri. "I think Tobias wrote this, for me." The researchers were stunned into silence. What they were witnessing wasn't just a linguistic miracle, it felt like destiny unfolding right before their eyes. And soon, the entire world would know Matteo's name. The moment Matteo's abilities became known, the news exploded across the globe. Within hours, major outlets were running the story. 4-year-old deciphers ancient papyrus scholars couldn't read. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, every network wanted an interview. The quiet hotel where the Hernandez family was staying turned into a media circus overnight. Cameras crowded the lobby, reporters camped outside, and helicopters circled the building like the boy was a head of state. Elena felt overwhelmed. Her phone buzzed nonstop with calls from journalists, universities, even religious leaders. But through all the chaos, Matteo remained strangely calm, as if his mind was tuned into another world entirely. One night he tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, we're going to find the cave. The place Tobias talked about. We have to finish what he started." Meanwhile, Matteo's father Roberto, an engineer working in Mexico, flew to Cairo the moment he heard the news. He embraced his son tightly, pride and fear battling in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Elena. "We don't know what we're walking into, or if it's safe for Matteo." But Elena had already made her decision. "For years people misunderstood him," she said softly. "Teachers, doctors, everyone wanted to label him. But Matteo wasn't broken, he was different, and now, the world finally sees why." She looked at her son, his small hands tracing invisible shapes in the air, and she knew without a doubt, this is what he was meant to do. Shortly after, Dr. Al-Masri organized an emergency archaeological mission. A team of 15 specialists from universities across Israel and Jerusalem joined the effort. And one condition became immediately clear: Matteo had to go. Without him, they had no way to interpret the coordinates or understand the symbols. It felt as if someone, centuries ago, had written this message knowing Matteo would one day read it. 3 days later the team arrived in Nazareth. The modern city looked nothing like the ancient village described in texts, but the land still held echoes of the past, dusty hills, olive trees, and a silence that felt older than time. Matteo had been kept away from the media and traveled quietly with Elena. Wearing a blue cap to shield him from the sun, he walked with small determined steps, raising little clouds of dust with each stride. As the team approached the area described in the papyrus, north of Nazareth, no one expected anything unusual. The landscape was barren, lifeless. Just rocks and dry shrubs. Then Matteo stopped. He raised his hand and pointed. "We're here." He knelt, pressed his palm to the ground, and closed his eyes. "The olive trees. I can feel them. This is the place." A chill raced through Dr. Al-Masri. The description matched the papyrus perfectly. Within the hour, the excavation began. And soon enough, beneath sand and tangled roots, they uncovered something astonishing. A carved stone entrance. Exactly where Matteo said it would be. It wasn't just archaeology anymore. They had crossed into the impossible. Once the carved entrance was uncovered, the excavation team moved fast. This wasn't a natural cave opening, it was clearly shaped by human hands, intentionally hidden beneath centuries of sand, wind, and wild vegetation. Engineers set up pulley systems to lift the massive stone blocking the passage. It weighed nearly 800 kilograms, and no one knew what might lie beneath it. After days of careful work, the stone finally shifted. A cold breath of air escaped from below, air that had been sealed away for thousands of years. When the slab was fully lifted, a narrow tunnel was revealed. So narrow, in fact, that only one adult could enter at a time, bent over. The silence inside seemed ancient, untouched. Dr. Al-Masri aimed a high-powered flashlight into the darkness. The tunnel walls, made of polished limestone, reflected the light in a soft glow. But what truly shocked the team were the carvings. Hundreds of symbols. The exact same script as the papyrus. Perfectly preserved. Impossible to explain. Dr. Samira Naguib stared in disbelief. This shouldn't exist, she whispered. These symbols were only on the papyrus. How could they also be carved here? Matteo held his mother's hand tightly. His small body trembled slightly, but he didn't step back. I need to go inside, he said. Roberto immediately objected. No, absolutely not. It's dangerous. We don't know what's in there. But Matteo shook his head calmly. The symbols are calling me. I can hear them from here. No one dared interrupt that moment. It felt as if the cave itself was waiting for him. They fitted Matteo with a harness, a headlamp, and safety gear. Several archaeologists followed behind as they carefully descended the narrow passage. The tunnel floor crunched softly under their feet, dirt, pebbles, untouched for millennia. Then Matteo stopped. He knelt, touched the ground, and whispered, "There's something here." Archaeologists immediately began clearing the dirt. Within minutes, the edge of a stone panel appeared. The entire team went silent. It took 2 hours to expose a 60 by 40 centimeter stone lid. When they lifted it, a shallow chamber was revealed, and inside it, wrapped carefully in ancient linen, was a small bundle. The linen was astonishingly well preserved despite being nearly 2,000 years old. Dr. Naguib unwrapped it slowly and deliberately. The cameras rolled. Everyone held their breath. Layer by layer, the linen opened until finally, a small scroll of parchment appeared. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Written on the outside, in the strange ancient script, was a single word: witness. The same symbol Matteo had identified earlier. Elena covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Dr. Al-Masri whispered, "This is the second testimony." Matteo stepped forward, eyes shining. "I need to read it," he said softly. "I need to know what Yeshua wrote." The real discovery was only beginning. The newly discovered scroll was immediately transferred to the preservation labs at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Ancient parchment this fragile couldn't simply be unrolled, it had to be strengthened and stabilized first. For 2 full days, experts worked meticulously, restoring moisture balance and reinforcing the fibers. Finally, on the 3rd morning, they declared it ready. The team gathered around as the scroll was carefully unfurled. It was breathtaking. The parchment measured 92 by 24 centimeters, and despite its age, the ink was still dark and readable. The characters matched the exact same unknown script found on the papyrus and the cave walls. Only one person could read it, Matteo. As he approached the glass-protected table, Elena stood beside him, her heart pounding. But Matteo looked calm, almost like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. He placed his small hands on the edge of the glass and whispered, "This is Yeshua's handwriting. I can feel it." The room went silent. Then Matteo began to read, his voice steady, gentle, almost musical. "I, Yeshua son of Yosef, write these words in my 30th year. I know my time in this world grows short. I have seen what will come, and though I cannot stop it, I can leave my truth for those who will hear." The researchers stared at him, stunned. The scroll contained reflections from Yeshua's own life, his childhood memories, his teachings, and the burden of being misunderstood. Matteo continued. My message was simple. Each of you carries the same light I carry. It was never about becoming like me, but realizing you already are. The impact of these words hit the experts hard. If authentic, they challenged centuries of established doctrine. At one point, Rabbi Moshe Goldstein, present as a religious observer, jumped to his feet. This cannot be real. It contradicts everything our traditions teach. But Dr. Naguib calmly held up the lab report. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the scroll was from the early 1st century. Every component matched the era. Forgery was impossible. All eyes returned to Matteo. He was reaching the end of the scroll now, and his voice softened into a whisper. I have hidden 3 testimonies. The first where the stones remember. The second beneath the waters. And the final, where my body was taken. When you reach that place, you will find the words I left for the world. The room turned ice cold. Everyone knew exactly what that meant. The third testimony was at Golgotha, where Yeshua was crucified. Matteo closed the scroll gently and looked up at his mother with those amber eyes. Mom, we have to go to Jerusalem. The moment Matteo said, we have to go to Jerusalem, everything accelerated. His words didn't just shock the archaeological team, they sent ripples across the entire world. Golgotha wasn't just any location, it was one of the most sacred, politically sensitive, and historically charged places on earth. Claiming that Yeshua had hidden something there was enough to ignite global debate. When the team arrived in Jerusalem, crowds were already gathering. Reporters, religious groups, protesters, pilgrims. Everyone wanted to see the child who claimed to read the words of Jesus himself. The Israeli police established a strict security perimeter around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the traditional site of Golgotha. The archaeological team received special authorization to investigate, though many officials strongly opposed the idea. But Matteo walked through the ancient halls without hesitation, as if he knew exactly where to go. His footsteps echoed across the stone floor. He didn't look left or right. He just walked, straight toward a rocky section near the base of the hill. There, he stopped. He knelt down, placed his hand on the stone, and whispered, Here. It's right beneath this rock. The researchers exchanged uneasy glances. This area had been built over, renovated, and reconstructed countless times across centuries. The odds of finding anything undisturbed were almost zero. Still, they set up ground-penetrating radar. Minutes later, the results came in, and the room erupted in disbelief. Beneath the stone was a man-made chamber, perfectly rectangular. A hidden room, undocumented, undisturbed, exactly where Matteo said it would be. This is impossible, Dr. Al-Masri breathed. But Matteo simply said, Yeshua left something there. We have to go inside. The team began the delicate process of opening the chamber. Every movement was slow, precise. One mistake could damage holy ground or priceless history. After days of careful excavation, a narrow vertical shaft leading downward was revealed. It was barely wide enough for a child, and pitch black inside. Matteo volunteered to go first. Cameras were attached to his harness, broadcasting the descent to monitors above. The entire world watched in silence. The shaft went down about 12 meters until Matteo's feet touched stone. He looked around with his headlamp. A small room sat beneath Golgotha, a secret chamber no one had imagined. And at its center stood an untouched cedarwood chest, glowing in the beam of his light. Matteo walked toward it slowly, reverently. He placed both hands on the lid. This is the third testimony, he whispered. The archaeologists carefully lifted the lid. Inside was another parchment scroll. And beside it, a small wooden bird, just like the clay birds Yeshua had made for Eliezer. Elena burst into tears. Roberto covered his mouth in shock. Dr. Al-Masri's knees nearly buckled. Matteo lifted the wooden bird gently and closed his eyes. His voice trembled as he spoke. I can see him. Yeshua carved this at night, near the water. He was crying. Silence filled the chamber. Sacred, heavy, unforgettable. Then Matteo whispered one more thing. He made this, for someone like me. With the third chest now open, the team understood the weight of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just another archaeological find, it was something that could reshape spiritual history forever. The newly discovered scroll was escorted under heavy security to the Jerusalem conservation labs. Even breathing on parchment this old could cause damage, so preservation experts worked for days, stabilizing it before anyone dared unroll it. Meanwhile, the world held its breath. Millions watched live news broadcasts, waiting for the moment Yeshua's final words might be revealed. Finally, after several tense days, the scroll was ready. When it was gently opened, the parchment unfurled like it had been waiting 2,000 years for this moment. The ink remained bold, the strokes graceful and deliberate, as if the writer had never imagined his words would be hidden for millennia. Matteo stepped forward. This time he didn't tremble. His eyes reflected a deep, almost ancient calm. He took a breath and began reading the final testimony. To whoever finds these words, know that I did not come to divide humanity. Not to name some as saved and others as condemned. I came to remind you that every human being carries the same divine light. Gasps rippled across the room. These lines alone challenged centuries of interpretations. Matteo continued, voice soft but unwavering. The kingdom of God is not in the heavens nor in temples of stone. It is within you, within every heart that learns to love without fear. For love is the force that destroys the walls men build between each other. The researchers stood frozen. Some cried, some stared blankly, overwhelmed. Then came the final lines, the ones that shook the world. I left 3 testimonies. The first where the stones remember. The second beneath the waters. And the last where my body was returned to the earth. These words are for the generations who will seek truth beyond doctrines, who choose unity over division. When Matteo finished, he lowered his head. A quiet tear rolled down his cheek. Mom, that was his last message, he whispered. That's what Yeshua wanted us to know. Above ground, the world watched through live cameras. It didn't matter what religion people followed, for a moment, humanity simply listened. The debate would come later. Acceptance, rejection, controversy, they were all inevitable. But one thing could not be denied. The scrolls were real, the tests were conclusive, and no living soul, except Matteo, could read that ancient language. He had done exactly what the testimonies required. He had brought the words to light. The reading of the third testimony sent shockwaves around the world. Religious institutions scrambled to respond. Some embraced the discovery, others fiercely rejected it. But none of them could argue with the scientific evidence. Carbon dating confirmed the scrolls were 2,000 years old. Ink analysis matched ancient compositions. The parchment fibers were authentic. And most striking of all, no known scholar on earth could read the script. Yet Matteo could. Soon, all 3 scrolls were placed on display at the Israel Museum, protected behind reinforced glass. Millions traveled from around the world just to catch a glimpse of them. Yeshua's final messages, preserved across 2 millennia. As the world buzzed with excitement and debate, Matteo's life changed completely. He had just turned 5. Worldwide invitations poured in. Scientists began studies to understand how his mind worked, how he accessed a language unknown to humanity. Yet Matteo remained, Matteo, quiet, thoughtful, gentle. A little boy who preferred drawing symbols in his notebook to speaking on camera. Years passed. By the time Matteo was 9, he was living a quiet life again in Guadalajara with his family. He attended school, played in the yard, and still filled notebooks with ancient-looking signs whenever the mood struck. But something was different now. No new testimonies came, no new symbols called to him. It was as if the mission he had been chosen for was complete. Still, Elena sometimes found him sitting by the window at night, staring at the stars with a look too old for his young face. One evening, she sat beside him and softly asked, "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" Matteo didn't look away from the sky. "Tobias's work is finished," he said quietly. "But there's still so much truth people haven't learned yet." Elena felt a strange chill. Her son wasn't speaking like a child, but like someone carrying a weight passed down through centuries. Matteo continued. Truth doesn't always hide, Mom. Sometimes, it chooses the person who can hear it. Elena watched him in silence, realizing something deep and unexplainable. Even though Matteo's journey with the scrolls was over, the spark inside him, the connection to something ancient and vast, was still very much alive. Maybe one day it would lead him somewhere new. Maybe not, but one thing was certain. Tobias's legacy had found its final guardian, Yeshua's words had reached the world, and history would never be the same again.